Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this discussion today about elective pay, which is formerly known as direct pay, in case you've seen that name elsewhere. My name is Mackenzie Love. I'm a Senior Program Manager and Transportation Planner at the Great Plains Institute, or GPI, and along with my colleagues, will be your host today. Next slide, please. So I know we have some folks here today from Minnesota, Michigan, and Ohio, which is quite a big area. So we'd like to start things off with an icebreaker that we'll get to in just a minute. And we also recognize that folks on this call either have been or are working with GPI in a few different programs. So after that, I'll share a quick overview of one of those, being Charging Smart, and how elective pay aligns really well with one of its categories of best practices called government operations. Then we'll move into the core content today, which is a really thoughtful and exciting presentation about elective pay itself and how to take advantage of it from the Electrification Coalition. And afterwards, we'll talk about a new elective pay cohort that you could join in Minnesota to help you navigate that process going forward. We'll then wrap things up with a few question and answers, some updates, and some next steps that you can take to get moving along your journey. Great, so I think it's time for our icebreaker. Everyone, would you please go to the chat window in your Zoom screen to introduce yourself, maybe include your name, title, and the locality or entity that you work for. And please include the state. As I mentioned, we have a couple of different states represented here. And answer the question, has your community purchased an EV for your municipal fleet? And if not, do you plan to? I'm going to try to watch this chat box and summarize some of these responses as they come in, but I'd also encourage you to keep an eye out on that chat so that you can see what your peers are doing and maybe look for folks that you might want to reach out to after this webinar. And don't worry if you see someone that you'd love to talk to but don't have their contact information, GPI can kind of play intermediary and maybe help you get those conversations rolling. We love the idea of helping create kind of phone a friend networks, if you will. So these icebreakers are super important. So with that, I will give you all a couple of minutes to start putting things in chat. I know that's quite a lot of questions to answer, but maybe we can move to the next slide. I'll give you a bit of an overview and then I'll come back and kind of go over what you put in the chat. So next slide, please, Mintas. Thank you. So Charging Smart, I've mentioned it once already. I just want to give you an overview of what it is in case you haven't heard of it yet. It's a structured technical assistance and designation program that supports local governments in advancing transportation electrification of all modes and making sure that the benefits of that work are accessible to everyone in your community. It does cover 6 different categories of actions that we think are really impactful, and those have been pulled together based on the experience of GPI with working with over 140 communities now on electrification and the input of our really impressive network of partners who have done designation programs before and industry partners in the field. So we pulled together guidance in planning, regulation, utility engagement, education and incentives, government operations, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute, and shared mobility, which includes transit, bike share, carpooling, and anything else you can think of. School buses, that's another one. If you are interested in learning more about Charging Smart and all of the guidance and tools that it has to offer in all of those different topics, I'd encourage you to check out the resources on the right-hand side of this slide, and we'll share the slide deck with you after today's webinar, which includes some overarching resources and some kind of 101 webinars. But you know what, if you have any questions or you just want to ask someone directly instead of watching things, you can, of course, reach out to me or my team. Our emails will all be at the end of this slide deck as well. We're happy to talk anytime and at any stage that you are in your work on electrification. So I'm going to pause really quickly because I see several of you are responding in the chat about how in response to the icebreakers. So let me just pull out a couple of those. And again, we think it's really important to have the opportunity to reach out to peers. So this is a great opportunity. I'm seeing some folks saying, we haven't purchased an EV yet, but we've identified which vehicles we can replace when we have funding. You are definitely in the right place. We're going to be talking about exactly that situation today. I also see folks who say that they have an EV and it's working in certain departments, or they have a battery electric vehicle, including several that they've recently purchased for public safety departments, for example. So we have folks who are just getting started. We have folks who already have several in their fleet, and I think a little bit of everywhere in between, if I'm skimming quickly enough. Yep, looks like everywhere in between. And that's something beautiful about bringing together groups like this. You can see examples of how the work looks at every stage of the process and know that you're supported throughout by folks who really want to help you move forward, which is exactly what Charging Smart and all of the resources that you'll hear from our partners today are designed to do. With that in mind, Tess, could you take us to the next slide, please? So I mentioned the government operations category in Charging Smart, and this is a collection of best practices that are further broken down into really discrete actions that are, kind of a stepwise process that you can pursue to change your government operation practices over time. So that you can lead by example for all of the members of your communities as transportation electrification becomes more prominent. The actions in this section of the Charging Smart framework focus on municipal fleets, installing public charging infrastructure, either for use by your staff, the public, or both, and implementing charging workplace charging for your staff. And that can look a couple of different ways. It could be charging for them to use some electric vehicles that you have in your fleet for their work purposes, or perhaps setting up charging infrastructure for them to use with their personal vehicles when they come to work at the start of their shifts. So that kind of hopefully gives you an overview of how comprehensive the guidance can be in the Charging Smart framework. But I'll break it down one step further before we get to our feature presentation, if you will. So Tess, if you could, next slide, please. Great. So the first level of Charging Smart designation a community can earn is called bronze. We don't require any government operations related actions to earn this level of designation, because we know that doing something as comprehensive as changing the way your fleets work, or you offer infrastructure to your staff or your community, can be quite complicated and have a long lead time. And we want to be able to help you in that and not have anything feel rushed. However, there are some actions that you can take early on that kind of lay the groundwork for making those changes in the long run. And those can be used to earn points towards designation, even though it's not a requirement at the bronze level. Let me give you an example. One action in the framework is to complete an assessment of the community charger placement and opportunities that might exist in the future to put electric chargers in your area, including in the right of way. So that's something that can really help you identify opportunities and focus your work going forward in a really meaningful and productive way. And there are others, of course, just wanted to give you something illustrated there. And next, if you move on to silver level Charging Smart designation, there is a requirement here in terms of government operation to complete a fleet analysis and to consider plans for purchasing electric vehicles or EVs at that municipal level. We think this is a great place to be with silver because it, again, helps you assess needs and scope your work. And there are some really great tools out there, which I believe Torin's going to touch on in just a few minutes. I won't go too far into detail, but just some of the guidance that you could expect in Charging Smart around the fleet analysis is reminders to consider things like duty cycles for those vehicles. How often are they driving and then pausing and then driving again, or undertaking other activities, the typical route length and or service periods for those vehicles, their parking locations, and maybe the ages of those current vehicles in your fleet and when they are ready for replacement. When does it make sense to do that? And I noted a couple of you in the chat saying, we're ready. We're just making sure that the timing is right for when our current resources are due for replacement. So you're already thinking in the right direction, and we love to see that. Moving on to gold level designation, we would ask for a bit more from these communities. They would need to complete that silver action that I just mentioned, which is the fleet assessment, and also install a public charger in the right of way, or somewhere else in the community, or within walking distance of a multifamily housing development. So the location is up to the discretion of the community. We try really hard with the Charging Smart program to make sure that it meets communities where you are and with the needs of your community members, and matches their desires. So we don't want to be too prescriptive. So this is just asking you to install an EV charger somewhere. And then to make sure that those are consistent, those installations are consistent with any national charging and connection standards, and that you think about operations and maintenance right at the beginning of the process of installing, procuring, and getting those resources up to use for your community. The other requirement is to purchase an EV for fleet use to meet some adopted goals. Again, another great way to lead by example. And this is another instance of trying to incorporate flexibility. You could earn points towards a gold level designation in the Charging Smart program by purchasing a sedan for general use by your staff, but it could also be a medium or heavy duty vehicle like a fire truck, a garbage truck, anything along those lines. We want to celebrate you and recognize you for all the work that you put into getting a vehicle of any type. And I think that is, oh, one more thing. Oh, like how could I, this is one of my favorite slides of all time. This is talking about how the Charging Smart program encourages and supports participants in making sure that the work they do on transportation electrification is accessible. The benefits of that work are accessible to every member of their community, regardless of their current circumstances. And we do that through a system called EVs for All, which awards points to communities that put in additional effort and make a big impact in terms of expanding access to electrification. We did cover this topic pretty in depth in our Charging Smart 101 webinar. So if you'd like to learn more, I'd encourage you to go back and check out that recording on YouTube that is linked in this slide deck. But I do want to highlight a couple of things and give you an example. We know that the actions in Charging Smart come in different types, and there's going to be many different ways to use your work to improve access for your community members. So there's a few different paths you'll see on your screen here, being in the green, purple, and blue. And those are just different ways that you can think about improving access. So if for the top level here, if you're working on a plan or a regulation or a policy, something that you could do that would be really good is making a statement that acknowledges the barriers some members of your communities might face to experiencing the benefits of your work around electrification. But if you want to take that a little bit farther, you could earn more points by making a formal commitment to addressing those barriers. So if you were going to do a fleet analysis, for example, you might make a statement at the beginning of your report that says, we recognize that transitioning our fleet to electric vehicles might benefit our community in terms of reducing pollution, but there are some member of our communities that have been historically disproportionately impacted by transportation emissions. And that's something we'd like to address in the future. But if you want to take it another step further, after that, you can make a formal commitment to using your electric fleet vehicles specifically in the communities that have been identified as being impacted most by emissions, using those electric vehicles there first, or encouraging your staff through policy to select an electric vehicle from your fleet options when they go out in routes through those areas. So there are several other examples, but the main point that I want to get through to you is there's many ways to increase the benefit of electrification to everyone in your community. And we're happy to help you think through how to do that at any point as you participate in Charging Smart. So I think that is all for this slide. Mintus, if you could take us to the next, please. I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to our guest speaker for today. Thank you for being here, Torin. Um, so, Torin Spencer is a program manager with the Electrification Coalition, and he has worked on American Cities Climate Challenge with the City of Orlando and Orlando Utilities Commission, advancing customer and fleet electric vehicle adoption. He's currently focused on the Southeast U.S. workplace charging implementation through Fourth's EV Adoption Leadership Program. Before joining the Electrification Coalition in 2020, Torin gained experience in both the natural conservation field and the automotive industry after graduating from the University of Central Florida. So thank you, Torin, for being here with us today and for sharing your wealth of knowledge. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Appreciate it. Thank you for the great introduction and pleasure to meet everybody. Sorry for not being able to hang out with you all in the Midwest, but I will be in Farmington, Minnesota in the coming months. So I'll be up there soon. So wanted to meet with everybody today and talk a little bit about elective pay. Some of you may know a lot of information about it, some may not. So we'll kind of just start at square one, and then we'll get to frequently asked questions at the end. A little disclaimer, I am not a tax professional, no matter how professional I look. We want you to check with your tax professional before putting in any information regarding elective pay. Want to make sure you cross all your T's and dot all your I's. This is just recommendations based on current tax code. We are constantly answering questions and learning new things. But before you apply for elective pay, make sure you work with your tax professional directly. So elective pay is the system where credit allows tax-exempt and governmental agencies to benefit from tax credits, which they weren't previously eligible for based on their lack of federal tax burdens. This credit comes as a refund. And elective pay now applies to 12 of the IRA's tax credits, and 2 of which are related to vehicle electrification that we work with on a regular basis. That would be 45W, which is the credit for qualified commercial clean vehicles, and then 30C, which is the alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit, which is why we always go by the alphanumeric abbreviations. Eligibility. State and local governments, tribal entities, rural co-ops, other tax-exempt entities should all be eligible for elective pay. This applies to entities that were previously excluded from tax credits due to not having a tax burden. If the entity does have a burden, payment will be offset by any tax liability of the entity, and excess will be refundable. So an example of that, say a city buys a large electric garbage truck for municipal waste collection. Through direct pay, the city can get up to 30% or $40,000, whichever is lower, of the cost of the truck back by using the commercial clean vehicle credit, which is 45W. 45W up to 7,500 goes back to light duty vehicles. Those are vehicles that are 14,000 pounds or lighter, so your standard sedans, pickup trucks, etc. For medium and heavy duty vehicles, those that are over that weight limit, the lesser cost, either 30% of the base price or $40,000. So if you purchase a medium heavy duty EV for 100 grand, you would get 30 grand back, not $40,000. For this tax credit, there are no requirements for or relating to critical minerals or domestic sourcing. So whatever vehicle you purchase, whether it's built in the USA or built abroad, will still qualify for 45W. And also, plug-in hybrids are also eligible for half of the credit. So battery capacity of at least 7 kilowatt hours if the gross vehicle weight is under 14,000 pounds, and if the battery capacity is at least 15 kilowatt hours if it is more than 14,000 pounds. So 7 kilowatts if it's less than, 15 if it's more than. And then 30C, that has to do with EVSE or charging infrastructure. So 6% of the cost of your charging station back, not to exceed $100,000 per item of property. So that kind of just refers to single chargers. Can be increased to up to 30% if certain prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met. Those need pretty good documentation that municipalities and eligible entities are following those requirements in order to be eligible for those. You must also be in a census tract identified as non-urban or low-income areas for 30C. I'll show you a map on the next slide that shows that most areas are eligible for that, but if you get closer to densely populated city areas, it may be difficult to be fully eligible for 30C. More details, including tax form examples, can be found on our website. We have multiple annotated tax forms, as well as an eligibility guideline. You can go through that whole flow chart and figure out where you are in the process, whether you're eligible, and what you should be doing next. Here's that map I was telling you about. So final rulemaking for 30C shares eligible census tracts for the tax credits, covering approximately 99% of US land territory and 62% of the population. So there are multiple areas that are fully eligible, which is the green areas. The yellow are eligible for a shorter amount of time, and the gray areas, as you get a lot closer to city and downtown areas. If you zoom in on that map, those would be the areas that would be uneligible. But a lot of space, a lot of good areas for that. And if you want to visit that map, interact with it, go to anl.gov for the refueling infrastructure tax credit. So the whole summary of this elective pay process, make sure you identify the credit that you're going for, whether it be vehicle, infrastructure, or both. The infrastructure must be in a census tract designated area, like we mentioned before. Make sure to complete your project and put it in service. This has to be all fully completed before you apply for the tax credit. There are questions about, well, what do I do if I haven't asked for money for charging yet? There are ways around that. You can put it in service and then allow for free charging for a day, a week, just to say it was put in service this tax credit year, so it doesn't get pushed to the next one. There are ways to make sure it goes into service faster than expected for some of these longer projects. That claim credit for the year and the vehicle infrastructure must be put into service. Determine your tax year. This will set your filing deadline. Fiscal year filing and calendar year filing can request extensions. The final deadline for applications for this year is November 15th. That is for those that have already been put in the pre-filing system to request an extension. If you have not put in that request for an extension, do so immediately. That can be a little bit of a wait getting back approval for that, up to 6 weeks. So want you to get the ball rolling on that because the deadline is coming up rather quickly. Next step is to complete the pre-filing with the IRS. That's what I was saying, is do that before November. This is through id.me, and you'll receive an administer and then an authorized user. Then file that tax return, mail those forms to the IRS in Utah, and then you receive your refund after your return is accepted. There are multiple required forms for these different tax credits. For the commercial clean vehicle credit, for Schedule A, you got Form 8936. You have the 2023 schedule, and then Form 8936 clean vehicle credits there as well. For the alternative fueling property credit, 8911. And then for both, you have 3800 and 990T. So multiples there. We do have a lot of those annotated on our website, so you can show you what sections you should be looking for to fill out before you send it back, and where to put all that different information. And we'll probably have some photos up on the rest of this deck. See, so you got some annotated tax forms there. A lot of municipal representatives haven't had to work with tax documents before. So focusing on the most important things, obviously a couple different sections, but for the clean vehicle credit there on the left and the clean vehicle credit on the right, just a couple different areas. Take a look at those. You figure out which ones you need to file out, and then work with your tax representative before sending those in. And then here's another one of resources that I mentioned earlier. This one is our decision tree. It will help you figure out where you are in the process, or if you're even eligible. So you can figure out public or private, what tax credit you're claiming, whether it be 45W, 30C, making sure your project is in service, completing forms, and then mailing all of that in to the IRS. There are some additional considerations when you're applying for elective pay. Be sure to designate a point of contact for registering through the portal. Make sure domestic sourcing is not required for 45W. So remember that. You can really go after whatever vehicle suits your needs. Ensure all the EVSE sites are within designated 30C eligible areas, and always consult tax professionals before filing. A lot of FAQs come up when we talk about this. We're still learning about it as it goes on. This has been a very new development from the IRS, but a couple questions we've gotten in previous presentations, and then a couple answers to a couple questions we got in advance of our webinar today. So like I said earlier, are hybrids eligible? Hybrids are not necessarily eligible, but plug-in hybrids are eligible for half of the vehicle credit at $3,750. What costs are included in the infrastructure credit? Generally, the IRS has said costs include anything needed for the system to run. So that's DAS, conduit, wires, switchgear, wiring harness. That said, since costs vary by project, check the guidance and refer to any consults you may have. Some other questions we had about what qualifies, say the purchase of a site with a building on it to be removed, or the cost to remove a building where the EV chargers will be placed. That is probably not eligible for the tax credit. Could you use engineering cost for plans and specification for creating the parking lot? Is that covered by 30C? Probably not. Can you use the cost of creating the parking lot? That could be a stretch if you could prove it to an auditor. Maybe. Probably not, but all costs associated with installing EV charging stations, the charging stations themselves and the transformers that go along with those chargers, those are most certainly eligible for tax credits. So yes, the machinery is included. It can be fairly limited to large grade machinery. Definitely check the guidance, read through it. If it sounds like it meets your criteria, then go with it. And then what are the limits on the credits? Best thing about it, they're uncapped. There are no limits. So however many EVSE ports you're putting in, however many vehicles you're putting into service, you can get credits on all of those. So some next steps. If you are filing for current projects, get your team together, and that's everybody that will be involved in the process. Make sure everybody is on the same page, all accounting teams, legal, sustainability, fleet managers, etc. Make sure everybody is on the same page and get everybody's buy-in. When you start this, if you leave somebody out, you may have to start over and get them up to speed really quick, and that can be more difficult than starting together as a team from the get-go. Register your account. If you haven't done that already, please do that as soon as possible. If you are filing for future tax years, start recording your data as projects come online, and then definitely check out Lawyers for Good Government. Lawyers for Good Governance. They have templates for data collection on their website as well. But that was a lot of information, really, really fast. Happy to try to answer some Q&A. Again, we're getting questions all the time. Some of your questions we may have gotten in previous sessions before, but we have sometimes all new questions that we haven't even gone over yet. So I may have to get back to you on it, but happy to try to break it down with everybody here. Our design fees and eligible expense, that is a good one. If that can be audited to where you know it actually made a difference in putting EVSE in, if it was significantly expensive, if it was completely necessary in putting the EVSE in, It's possible it could be put on there, but it would have to be thoroughly proven, documented in order to be an eligible expense. We always encourage entities to go after whatever is actually needed uh, to build the EVSE. So that would be the physical application. So conduit wires, switchgear, wiring harness, all of that, that will definitely qualify. But things that aren't necessarily tangible aren't necessarily eligible. But great question, Ben. Thank you. Yes, Catherine, go ahead.
Hey, Torin. Thanks so much for your presentation. So we've heard from a number of Minnesota communities that have already filed for EV purchases that they made last year. But I haven't heard of any examples yet of communities who have filed for the charging infrastructure. Have you heard of examples of folks who have successfully done that yet for any infrastructure they installed in the past year? And yeah, just curious to hear what you know about those examples yet.
I don't have any specific examples for you, but we do multiple calls and webinars for multiple different regions. We've had questions and examples from partners at Lighthouse, partners at WRI. We've had folks from Clean Transportation in Palmetto County in Florida, Atlanta Lighthouse cohort, City of Clearwater. They all have these good questions about putting in EVSE and getting those funds back. So yes, there are a lot of entities out there that have put it in and gotten them back. But there's multiple of them, and I don't necessarily have the tally sheet in front of me.
That's okay. I was just curious. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And then also, because the deadline this year is November 15th, that is for all projects that were put into service in 2023. So applying for them in 2024. If you've already done everything in the 2024 calendar year and they're already in service now, you could probably get your credit for 2024, completing that application by November. But if not, you can always push that to 2025 as well and apply for that next calendar year for this year. Ben had a good question. After sending off necessary documents, how long should we expect to receive the funds? That's a good question. Patience is a virtue. It is not necessarily overnight. It is not necessarily a couple weeks. It could be a couple months before you get it all back, but they do a very thorough job making sure everything kind of comes back all in one piece, not necessarily one thing at a time. So it could be a while before you see the funds, but they will come back as long as everything is applied for properly and all forms are completely filled out. The more information and more timelines and documentation you can give to the IRS about those vehicles that have been put into service and EVSE that's come online, the better. Dan had a question. We need to take ownership of the EVs before we send in documents, correct? Yes, that is correct. You need to take ownership of the EV. That is the date that it was put into service is the day you take ownership of it. That's how it differs from EVSE. EVSE is the day it is put online. So getting a vehicle can be quite a bit quicker than putting in EVSE. That could be months at a time. But purchasing a vehicle could be a one-day transaction. So when you get that vehicle, that is when you take ownership of it. Correct. Good question from Nicola. You're very welcome for the information. Thank you guys for joining us. Appreciate you. If you purchased the vehicle in 2023 and was placed into service in 2024, which year do you need to submit your documents for? So if you purchased the vehicle in 2023 and you fully took ownership of it in 2023 and placed into service in 2024, it should apply to 2023. So that one you would definitely want to apply for as soon as possible, just to make sure. Another one from Ben, if we purchase multiple vehicles at one time, do they need to be separate inputs into the portal, or can they be combined into a single transaction? Each vehicle needs its own form. So if you have 2 vehicles, it'd be 2 forms, 3 vehicles would be 3 forms, one would be one, but each vehicle is its own tax credit. Good question there. Any other questions? We still got time.
I'll ask another question.
Sure.
So, thinking about, you gave the example of the electric garbage truck at the beginning of your presentation. So this would cover $40,000. I'll admit that I don't know what electric garbage trucks are going for at the full cost, but does the Electrification Coalition have resources on like how cities might cover the rest of those, the rest of the cost of those types of vehicles?
Well, Catherine,
On EPA grants, things like that.
Catherine, I am so glad you asked. Electrification Coalition does have a funding finder tool on our website. It's very easy to use. You can go in there and designate what kind of entity you represent, whether it be a city, county, state. We can also do it for school districts, businesses, what have you. And you can go in there, designate what kind of funding you might be looking for, whether it be for vehicles or EVSE. And then you can get examples spit back out at you and see what kind of funding could work for your specific use case. Thank you, Rebecca, for putting that in there. That is our link to our funding finder. Multiple tools on there as well. Mackenzie was mentioning earlier about learning about total cost of ownership. We have a total cost of ownership tool in there, the drive tool, that can help you figure out what kind of vehicles might be good for replacements in your fleets based on the annual miles traveled, but also your replacement schedule for your fleet. We do have technical services on our team as well. We can actually walk you through that. And also we are working with Fourth Mobility out of Oregon for those that have already put in EVSE charging, the eval certification. If you are helping anybody within the city trying to adopt EVs or already have charging put in front of, say, the police station, say City Hall, your municipality, your city, your county may already be eligible for a free eval certification if you sign up for that before November. So check out that website as well.
Great. Thank you, Torin, and everyone who's been asking questions. This has been a great conversation. Just wanted to add a couple of things. Folks, if you have questions, keep putting them in the chat, but just wanted to add a couple of things quickly. If you are interested in pursuing elective pay or joining the Charging Smart program and getting some more guidance, we are working on increasing our resources for communities that might be disadvantaged or underserved in any way. We're trying really hard to be very flexible with that so that we can help as many folks as possible. So if you are feeling like you don't have the resources or staff time, capacity, whatever the limitation is to be able to go after resources like this, please reach out to us where we can try to help you find a way to accomplish it anyways, and we'll do our best. And the other thing I'll note is Torin rightfully mentioned some of these things. Patience is a virtue, and I will flag that installing EVSE, or basically those charging stations in any location and for any purpose, be it public or fleet, that action in and of itself, I know some of you know this firsthand, can take some time as well. So a couple of lessons we've learned through our Charging Smart implementation is that it's really helpful to go ahead and evaluate any aesthetic or zoning regulations that your community might have on the books that could impact installation of EVSE, and figure out what those are in advance before you start talking to vendors. And then working through the permitting process, if that's applicable in your particular installation, to make sure that the steps are clear, that the process is clearly posted and shared or made clear to whatever vendor you're working with, and that hopefully you accept electronic signatures, which seems like a very small thing for me to mention, but bringing those all together, reviewing your zoning code, determining if you need any special permitting, assessing if there's any aesthetic restrictions that are going to need to be adhered to, and making sure your permitting process is clear and that you can expedite things with digital signatures or other mechanisms that might make just the submission process a little bit quicker, can really add up in reducing the kind of initial steps that you need to take to get those EV/SE stations installed. So we could have an entire webinar probably about those things, so I won't go into detail, but if you have any questions or you want specific one-on-one guidance, the Charging Smart program is a great way to get that, and participation in it is completely free of charge to any community in any of the states that are attending today. So we're happy to help when we can. And my colleague Rebecca did mention in the chat that we will be sending out this recording and all of the links that Rebecca and Torin have been sharing in the chat in a follow-up email. So keep an eye out for that, but let me pause one more minute to see if there's any other questions for Torin. Otherwise, Torin, it has just been a pleasure to have you here and to hear all of the expertise that you have. This is very complicated, so we really appreciate you taking the time to break it down.
Certainly. Thank you, Mackenzie. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Yes, it is a thorough process, to say the least. Crossing your T's, dotting your I's, taking your time, filling out those forms to the best of your ability. The first time is definitely the best way to go. And in the same token, try to do it as quickly as possible. That deadline is fast approaching. Make sure to apply to that application portal as soon as possible if you have not already. But best of luck to everybody applying for EV and EV/SE credits. Looking forward to seeing all of your fleets transform into full EV fleets in the coming future. But I know you guys can all do it one vehicle at a time.
Awesome. Thank you, Torin. Appreciate that. And now I'd like to go ahead and introduce you all to my colleague, Catherine Kemp, who is a program manager at the Great Plains Institute. And she has some more resources and information to share with you about how to take advantage of elective pay specific to our Minnesota folks right now. Catherine, are you ready to share your great news?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love sharing great news. So hi to my Minnesota folks. Hi. I see some folks on the call that are already participating in this elective pay cohort. So thanks. But I do see some Minnesota folks who are not yet. So just want to do a quick plug for a cohort that we are getting started. As you probably heard from Torin, like this is a kind of complex thing, and we are all learning together across the country. I really appreciate kind of I'm learning new things every single day, even in this webinar. So thanks, Torin. So we are creating a place for local governments, tribal nations, other folks who are eligible to take advantage of this in Minnesota and kind of work through this together. So we're going to be meeting every other month, always make some space to kind of share lessons learned, trade notes on, hey, I filed and haven't received my form yet. Have you received it yet? Like, let's troubleshoot together. So if you're interested in digging a bit deeper into this topic, feel free to shoot me an email or direct message me here, and we can get you added to that list. No pressure to participate every meeting, but just a place where you can kind of dig deeper into this topic. And again, keep learning together. So feel free, again, shoot me an email and I'll share our information in the email that Rebecca sends out as well. But that is a cohort that we're facilitating with our colleagues over at CERT's Clean Energy Resource Teams here in Minnesota. That's all I got.
Thank you, Catherine. That's all you got, as if it's not a really exciting program. This is great. Thank you for sharing that. And I'll take us to the next slide. Just a couple additional resources that you can take advantage of. Again, if you want to participate to Charging Smart and you're new to the program, the next step would be to complete a self-assessment, which we've been trying to keep very brief. And if you get to the self-assessment and don't know the answer to a question, completely fine to leave it blank or say, I don't know, and complete a commitment letter. There's also a one-on-one goal setting meeting with GPI staff. We like to meet with every single participant and really talk about what would make a difference to your community, to the people who live there, what your needs and desires are. And, for example, if you have a goal of pursuing the elective pay, maybe we could help you set up some stepwise things and get you connected with the cohorts and that Catherine just mentioned, or the resources that Torin provided. And help you also go a little bit more specific to your context. So I think we will have, yes, my colleague Rebecca just did pop a link in the chat for you to set up a one-on-one meeting with our staff. Again, that's one of your first steps to getting into Charging Smart and getting access to all of those resources and one-on-one technical assistance, as well as the support of a cohort of your peers, sometimes across state lines, which can be really beneficial to get a different perspective. Again, free to access, and you can do the self-assessment, the commitment letter, and the one-on-one meeting kind of in the order that makes sense to you. We're happy to talk with you when ready, but the self-assessment does help us make sure we can tailor any initial conversations around what means most to you. We'd also encourage you, of course, to apply for relevant funding as always, and as you had really astute questions about. And with that in mind, we do have a slide for you with the next slide with a new opportunity. Well, actually, it's not new, it's an extension. So the CFI grant program has extended their deadline by 2 weeks. And now the new timeframe is September 11th by 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. So there's a link in this slide deck to learn a little bit more about what you would need to do to submit and any question answers that you might have around that. And again, that's CFI, the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program from the FHWA. So certainly relevant to your electrification journey. And I think that is it from us. So here's all of our contact information. Reach out to us with any questions that you might have. There's our email addresses. We're happy to talk at any time. We'll keep watching for funding opportunities to share them out as they make sense. And we encourage you to consider elective pay using those resources Torin shared and the cohort that Catherine is graciously setting up. We'd like to be of support to you in any way that we can, and we're happy to talk at any time. So thank you for being here with us today, and best of luck with your next steps. All right, thank you all. And if you have any questions, we'll hang out for a couple of minutes here on the line, but otherwise we'll return a few minutes to your day so that you can get back to work. You know you have a lot to do.
Thanks, everybody.